On February 6, 2023, Cody Rhodes stood in the Monday Night Raw ring opposite a man who has a lot of history with his family, Paul Heyman. Cody talked in depth about something he's mentioned in the past, but not in so much detail. He talked about a time in his young life when his family was broke. He talked about Dusty doing car commercials not just for the money, but to get to keep the car. That night, Dave Meltzer confirmed all that Cody had said, and also told a story on Observer Radio of Dusty selling his own Rolex to get Cody and his sister into acting classes, which seems to have paid off all these years later. Cody then talked about Paul Heyman booking Dusty in ECW and paying him very well, thus giving him his confidence back. Cody wasn't just referencing a single appearance though. While it was supposed to be a one-off, in early 2000 Dusty would appear for ECW as part of a storyline to get a young talent to the next level. This is the story of when Dusty Rhodes went to ECW and feuded with Steve Corino. In this video we're going to stop off at every single time Dusty appeared on ECW TV, or Corino would mention him. I'll include timestamps in the description in case you want to skip to the bigger moments. For a little context on how Paul Heyman came to know Dusty, the two actually have a history going back to early 90s WCW. Heyman has told the story a few times of how he would sneak into Dusty's production meetings, eventually talking his way into sitting next to Dusty, just so he could learn booking from him. From the way Paul Heyman has talked about Dusty through the years, there's clearly some genuine respect there, and we saw a bit of that come out in the build to this year's WrestleMania. Late 1999 was a transitional time for Steve Corino in ECW. He had previously been the comedy heel, scared of his own shadow, never mind the rest of the ECW locker room. But in recent weeks he'd been trying to get himself taken more seriously, which isn't exactly an easy task when the ECW faithful think you're a joke. On the December 3rd, 1999 episode of ECW on TNN, Corino would try to make a name for himself by getting on stage and interrupting a Limp Bizkit concert. He even got to have an argument with Fred Durst on stage, until he turned around into an attack from Balls Mahoney, Axl Rotten and New Jack. On the following week's episode, ECW would come from the Tabernacle in Atlanta, Georgia, a well-known music venue that is still open to this day. Steve Corino would come out to be interviewed about the Limp Bizkit incident by Joey Styles. He already blamed hardcore wrestling for the way he saw America going, but now he was turning his vitriol to hardcore music as well, proclaiming acts like NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys far superior, truly dating this whole segment. Corino points his finger for starting all of this counterculture at one man, Dusty Rhodes, who was standing in the crowd. When it looked like Dusty was leaving, he would actually come down the walkway and get into the ring. As Dusty gets into the ring, Corino continues to berate him. According to Corino reflecting on this moment years later, the only instruction he'd been given beforehand was not to mention Dustin, who I believe around this time had just done the Terrible 7 gimmick on WCW Nitro, and would soon be out the door. Corino then hits Dusty with the lightest slap possible, and he and his hapless manager Jack Victory proceed to take the famous Dusty Rhodes elbows. In the interview I referenced earlier with Mike Moraldo, Steve Corino gushes over meeting Dusty that night, and how excited he was to take the elbows from him. Knowing this and watching it back, you can tell Corino is doing all he can to enjoy the moment while selling. Corino also noted that they may not have even been able to use the footage that week, given that was the same week that Dusty had left WCW. But when Dusty made it backstage, he wanted to work more with Corino, so this was aired as the catalyst for what was to follow. I'm making this video a couple of months removed from the segment on Raw between Cody and Paul Heyman. In the segment, it's very possible that the booking Cody was referencing was this interaction with Steve Corino, and Dusty in return stayed for a while, to eventually have matches with Corino, but we'll get to those. On the Christmas Day edition of Hardcore TV, Steve Corino was set to wrestle Balls Mahoney and Axl Rotten to get revenge on them for what happened at the Limp Bizkit concert. That match never actually takes place though, as we see Corino, Victory, and their rookie Rhino leaving Balls laid out in the locker room. There's blood both on Rhino's fists and the chair Victory is carrying. Corino says this is a warning to anyone who messes with them, including Dusty Rhodes. Balls manages to stagger to the ring for the match. He fights for all he can, but he's outnumbered. Once Balls has had enough, the Sandman enters, having been feuding with Rhino, but he gets gored through a table for his efforts. Balls manages to take advantage of the Sandman's appearance by decking Corino with a chair and pinning him to win the match. But Rhino gets revenge right after by hitting him with a gore, and Corino's crew leave on top. While Dusty Rhodes doesn't appear, the message here is simple. Corino should be taken seriously when Dusty rolls back into ECW. The next time we would see Dusty Rhodes would be at the Guilty as Charged pay-per-view from Birmingham, Alabama. While Corino and his crew put a beating on Jerry Lynn following a match, he gets on the mic and resumes running down Dusty. While Corino is running his mouth, however, Dusty appears from the crowd and clears the ring with elbows before doing his big elbow drop on Tommy Rich, ECW's resident full-blooded Italian, from Henderson, Tennessee. Don't ask. Things don't end well for Dusty though, as Rhino enters to attack him, and Corino's old school group pile on, until the ECW locker room empties to chase them away. The segment ends with Paul Heyman getting in the ring to check on Dusty, as the crowd loudly shows their appreciation. Corino mentioned in the interview that a lot of their feud took place on house shows for the live crowds, but Dusty would soon be returning to ECW television. On the January 15th Hardcore TV, Corino announces that Dusty and Tommy Dreamer have challenged Rhino and Corino to a match, next time ECW comes to Florida. Corino very notably talking really tough while hiding behind his monster Rhino. A couple of weeks later, on the January 28th TNN episode from New Orleans, Corino and Rhino would have a tune-up match of sorts, as they would take on Tommy Dreamer and a man called Josh Wilcox, who Joey Styles notes is not a full-time wrestler, but he was a starting tight end for the New Orleans Saints. I'm not going to talk much about Josh Wilcox here, because a few weeks ago I made a video all about him. Most of the match is worked by Rhino and Dreamer, as Corino comes in only when Rhino is winning to put the boots in, and Wilcox only comes in for the hot tag, or so we thought. When Wilcox gets the tag, it looks like Corino is going to back away from him. Wilcox, however, turns the chair on his own partner, turning on Dreamer. Corino is again made to look cunning and dangerous. Just when I thought this was going to end here, Corino gets on the mic and turns his attention to his upcoming match with Dusty, who actually appears in the building. Corino notes that last time Dusty came through the crowd, so he's ready for that. But what he wasn't ready for was Dusty sneak attacking him from the entranceway. Dusty makes short work of Corino in victory, before dropping the elbow on Wilcox to make the crowd happy. On February 4th, 2000, ECW finally arrives at Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the match finally happens. It would be Dusty and Tommy Dreamer against Steve Corino and Rhino. Corino starts the match by taunting Dusty into wanting to start, and when the American Dream obliges, Corino backs away and tags Rhino in. At this time, Dusty isn't as agile as he used to be, but what he can do the crowd loves. He tackles Rhino and puts a figure 4 leg lock on him, while Dreamer, Corino, Jack Victory and Francine, who is with Dreamer, work around them. After a wild brawl around the arena, where Dusty makes Corino bleed, the match settles back into the ring, with Rhino beating down Dreamer, just like the match in New Orleans. Tommy hits a suplex off the second rope, and finally gets to tag Dusty, and this time his partner doesn't turn on him. Dusty goes for the bionic elbow on Rhino, but misses. Just when it looks like Rhino is going to pile drive the Dream, Tommy makes the save, leading to Dusty hitting the big elbow on Corino to win the match. Despite Dusty getting the victory over Steve Corino, the story wouldn't end there. The following week in Tallahassee, Florida, Dusty would appear in the ring again. After taking a piledriver from the Impact players and laying motionless in the ring for several minutes, the program comes back from the break with Paul Heyman and Dusty Rhodes checking on the possibly injured Raven. This leads to an in-ring confrontation between Rhodes and Cyrus, who is more interested in getting the show going again for the sake of the network. Dusty talks to the people while Cyrus cowers in the corner, drawing Steve Corino out. Before Corino can do anything though, Dusty clears the ring until Rhino enters, and the three attack Dusty, with Jack Victory even using a trademark of the Rhodes family, a bull rope. Bizarrely, the Sandman enters on the entranceway, and the show just ends without us seeing a conclusion. On the following night's Hardcore TV in Jacksonville, Florida, Dusty would get in the ring again, as he and Dreamer once again took on Corino, but this time with Jack Victory. How would Corino fare this time without Rhino to hide behind? Well, not very well to begin with, as Tommy and Corino brawl into the crowd, with Dusty and Victory would fight around ringside in what is announced to be a street fight. Corino manages to slow the match down for a while using a ladder, but Tommy eventually gets to use it himself and tags Dusty in. Rhodes and Dreamer quickly team up and win the match with stereo bionic elbows, but as soon as Dusty gets the pin, he is attacked by Rhino. Just like the night before, the show ends with the Sandman running in, but this time we get to see him cane Rhino and Corino and save the day before the show ends. Things will go cold in the storyline for a couple of weeks, as Rhino would continue his feud with the Sandman, Tommy Dreamer would continue his long-time story with Raven, and Dusty would not be seen for a while. On the March 3rd TNN episode, Steve Corino would come out dressed in a cowboy hat, looking a lot like Dusty, also equipped with a bull rope with a cowbell on it. He confronts a confused-seeming Eric Watts, son of territory promoter Cowboy Bill Watts, and explains that he chose Watts as his opponent, and the match would be an old-school style bull rope match. The match never actually begins though, as Steve Corino assaults the referee with the cowbell, because said ref was sick of Corino bashing Milwaukee where they were that night. Watts then joins Corino in beating up the referee. Steve Corino then goes too far. First, he officially challenges Dusty to a bull rope match at the next pay-per-view, Living Dangerously. Then he proceeds to accuse Dusty of some truly awful things, the worst being cutting the brakes of Magnum TA's car, referring to the car accident that would cut Magnum's career short in 1986. On March 11th, one day before Living Dangerously, Dusty responds with a tape promo from his ranch. Dusty accepts Corino's challenge and promises to deck him with the cowbell in a way only Dusty Rhodes can. If this ECW run helped Dusty get his confidence back, you can see it in this interview. Finally, we get to March 12, 2000. ECW Living Dangerously from Danbury, Connecticut. Steve Corino kicks off the night in the ring, now adding cowboy boots to his American Dream cosplay. Before Dusty can come out, however, Corino picks a fight at ringside with Laurie Fullington, the wife of the Sandman who is sitting in the crowd. This is all part of the Sandman and Rhino's feud, which runs through most of 2000. Laurie ends up getting gored through a table, so the Sandman has to forfeit his match with Rhino in the vacant television title tournament because he goes to the hospital with his wife. Once order has been restored as much as it can be in ECW, Dusty Rhodes makes his entrance for the match. In the early going, Corino tries to back away and not put on his end of the bull rope, but as chance would have it, the referee for this match is H.C. Logue, the same referee that Corino attacked in Milwaukee, who makes sure to get the rope strapped to Corino. Every time he tries to retreat, all Dusty has to do is yank him back with the rope, and it doesn't take long until Corino meets the cowbell with his face. Dusty then drags a helpless Corino on a tour through the crowd. The match, once it gets back to the ring, can only be described, as Jim Ross would say, as bowling shoe ugly. But it is at least a definitive payoff to the feud, or so we might think. The end comes when Dusty tapes a second cowbell to Corino's head with help from the referee Corino attacked before, and Dusty drills a chair into it, finishing off with his big elbow to the mat for the pin. From just a couple of months ago when this story began, Steve Corino was well on his way to changing his character, from a comedy loser to a serious contender. There's just one problem though, he still hadn't gotten that one big win he needed, and so the story wouldn't end at Living Dangerously. On the March 25th TNN episode, Steve Corino comes out, still carrying the cowbell and wearing his cowboy boots. He proceeds to confront H.C. Logue, the referee that Corino attacked, who got his revenge at Living Dangerously. Corino claims to have destroyed Dusty Rhodes, showing that he clearly got his cowbell rung at the pay-per-view, before calling himself the New American Dream. Loc doesn't back down though, even challenging Corino to a fight. But Corino, in his cowardly way, sends another wrestler known as Chilly Willy in to take his place. As you might expect, this starts off very one-sided, but Loc actually gets a comeback in, which the crowd root for, but he makes a mistake by jumping off the ropes. Corino throws Chilly Willy the cowbell, but Loc gets to use it and counts his own pinfall. HC Loc gets the win. The next week, Steve Corino wants revenge on the Extreme Official, challenging him to a match himself. But it being Steve Corino, he doesn't do anything alone, as Jack Victory blindsides the referee. The two proceed to have a match, with Corino mostly taking charge, but Loc does his best to try and fight back. Eventually, having seen enough, the real American Dream returns, with a lady on each arm. Dusty again makes short work of Corino and Victory before pulling Loc on top as Jim Molyneux counts the pin. The next time Dusty would appear would be the April 21st TNN, and this time he would be in action again, but with a difference. Originally, this match begins as an Extreme Bull Rope match between Steve Corino and Tommy Dreamer, but things quickly descend into chaos. I should add here that by this time, the evil stable known as the Network had been established, consisting of Corino, Rhino, Jack Victory and Tajiri, all led by Cyrus the Virus, known these days as AEW's Don Callis. The network name being a reference to TNN itself, who were airing the show, who by this point Paul Heyman didn't have the best of relationships with. That information will come in handy for this section. After a few minutes of a really cool brawl of a match, in which the bull rope is merely a suggestion given how many times it comes on and off their wrists, Jack Victory runs in to help Corino and it all goes to pot from here. Victory's presence triggers the Sandman to come to Dreamer's aid, but not without taking his sweet time while his Metallica entrance song played, or his WWE Network dub. Sandman would even the odds for his side until he's attacked by Yoshihiro Tajiri, who enters next. Dusty wouldn't be the next man out though, as that would be New Jack, bringing his trademark weaponry. From here we have wrestlers and weapons everywhere, with Dreamer and Tajiri even brawling into the crowd. After Tajiri accidentally spits the green mist as his own partner Corino, New Jack somehow pins him to win the match. But it wouldn't end here, as that would cause the network's final boss to enter, that being Rhino. Just when it looked like the network had gotten revenge, out comes Dusty Rhodes, who clears the ring. His trusty bionic elbow hit several times could not drop Rhino to the mat though, but Sandman's cane eventually could. This allows for the team of good guys and New Jack to celebrate in the ring to close the show. Remember how I said earlier that the one thing left to do was for Dusty to elevate Steve Corino? Well, on April 22nd, Dusty would do just that at CyberSlam 2000, where he would lose in a singles match to Corino. Clips from the match would air on the following week's episode of ECW on TNN, which is the most I could find of it anywhere on the internet. The clips show that Victory and Corino used the cowbell on the bull rope, giving Corino the win. Corino was slightly robbed in a sense, as the main thing anybody remembers from CyberSlam 2000 was the changing of the guard in the main event, as Taz, who was with WWE by this point, had returned briefly to get the world title off Mike Awesome, who had defected to WCW. Taz would lose the title to the man that many consider to be the beating heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer. Most wrestlers might be glad to find out they were winning the world title, but not Tommy. His path through ECW had deliberately been one of just coming up short repeatedly, such as going nearly 2 years without defeating his main rival, Raven. In the Rise and Fall of ECW documentary that WWE made in 2005, Tommy explains, "The night that I won the belt, I was actually pissed off. I wanted to go my entire ECW career without ever winning a title. When Mike Awesome left, Paul put the title on me because he knew I wasn't going anywhere. The only reason I won titles, it was because guys left." Tommy has also said that he wanted his character to be remembered as a sort of Neverman, and so a plan was made that would make everyone happy. Tommy would win the title, but would immediately be challenged by the up-and-coming villain, Just Incredible. And Tommy, in his pride, would accept, only to lose the title fairly quickly to a new top star for the promotion. All of this is to say that nobody really talks about Steve Corino getting his win on this night. Jack Victory's involvement in Corino's win would lead to Dusty's final ECW match, as the two would face off in a bull rope match on the May 27th episode of Hardcore TV. We would join this match in progress with Dusty already bleeding. What we see of it is brief and pretty much one-sided, with Corino failing to help his ally and Dusty getting the win on his way out of ECW. By the end of the year 2000, Dusty would be ready to return to WCW, and would be about to feud with Ric Flair and Jeff Jarrett, teaming with Dustin. Meanwhile, Steve Corino would be enjoying a 2-month reign as ECW World Champion. A title reign that helped him to remain a main eventer in the years post-ECW. As another sign of the progress Steve Corino had made throughout the year, Pro Wrestling Illustrated would award him their Most Improved Wrestler award for the year 2000, and the feud with Dusty certainly helped him along that way. Dusty and Corino would continue to wrestle in various promotions in the following years, including Dusty's own promotion, Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling, which he both owned and wrestled in. In 2004, he would join TNA as a member of creative and an on-screen authority figure. His best remembered idea from this time might be the Lockdown concept, a pay-per-view where every match would take place inside a steel cage. While this was heavily ridiculed at the time, Lockdown would last for many years, with one such event being TNA's highest bought pay-per-view ever. Eventually, Dusty made his way back to WWE, famously being one of the early figureheads of NXT, still fondly talked about by those he helped along the way, from Kevin Owens to Seth Rollins to even the Tribal Chief. And another interesting side note that I just realised, a year after Dusty's passing in 2015, Steve Corino would actually be hired by NXT, continuing Dusty's work at the Performance Center. The ECW tenure did a lot for Steve Corino's career, in giving him a story where the fans could watch him develop and change. But it maybe did even more for the American Dream, who in his son's own words in 2023, was down on his luck and lacking in self-belief until he entered the land of extreme. To quote Cody, Dusty went from undesirable to undeniable. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.